So this was new, getting these traditions and this etiquette that was formalized rules based on how you could grieve and your bereavement period. Depending on how closely related you were to a deceased depicted the bereavement period you were allotted. A person could be expected to mourn anywhere from a few weeks to 4 years. It depended on your relation to the person, your sex, and your age. Mostly women, of course, dealt with mourning. Men, not so much. Women were more in tune with the mourning periods, and their rule books and the etiquette was mainly directed towards women. Visual mourning, or full mourning within the visual mourning, included all black attire made of heavy fabrics and veils were to be worn in public. This mainly lasted 1.5 years to 2 years. Gradually, a lady could incorporate white collars and cuffs, and that was about the 18-month to 2-year mark. She no longer had to wear veils in the second phase mourning. In third phase mourning, she could incorporate grays and purples and burgundies into her attire. And that was third phase mourning. That's kind of the end of the mourning period that you were allotted. These are some earlier pieces. As you can see, the drawing over here. Oh, it's not working. Anyway, so the one on the end, you can see she already has her white cuffs. This is second phase mourning. The lady in the center, sort of with the veil, that is first phase mourning. These is a nice mixture of the two because you have a lady in gray who is already in second phase, but then you have a lady who's still in first phase. Now, chances are these ladies were related to the same person who would have passed away. It's just one is closer relation than the other. What made the Victorian era the peak of mourning was this lady herself, Queen Victoria. She was in mourning for 40 years. While the general public would mourn for a few weeks to 4 years, as I said before, Queen Victoria made her own rules. She mourned from the death of Prince Albert in 1861 to her own death in 1901. It was very rare to see Queen Victoria in anything other than black with a few white collars and cuffs. She did have to wear various items that were related to her royal duties, but other than that, underlying everything, it was always black for 40 years. Now, keeping this in mind, Queen Victoria was the fashion icon, absolutely. Not just in Europe, but here as well. What she did, every woman wanted to do. So she took these 40 years of mourning and she made mourning popular. I know you're all wondering when we're actually going to talk about the hair art. I promise it's coming. One more thing that we need to talk about first. It's the ideology of memento mori. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that, but it is kind of what mourning jewelry that we think of in the Victorian era grew out of. So. Memento mori, remember to die. This ideology, the concept is very popular with Puritans and with artisans. Memento mori is mostly in the Georgian era, but it carries through the Victorian era as well. The concept of memento mori is that an individual can follow one of two paths. You can live life as the true Puritan and be prepared to meet God at any time, or you can live life to its fullest. You know you're going to die. Remember to die. You know it's coming. So during your life, you're going to live life completely to the fullest. This is a woodcut from 1640. It shows all the classic symbolism that you would see with memento mori, including the hourglass, the skull, the skeleton, the crossbones. These are also things that you've probably seen on grave markers, early grave markers. You'll see the skull and crossbones. That dictates that those were actually created during the Georgian, early Victorian period where you influx of memento mori. People also were wearing jewelry during memento mori period, or during the Georgetian period, that was considered memento mori because it would have the double M on it. Here are a few rings and a pendant that are memento mori pieces. So, of course, you can see it with the skull and the crossbones and skeletons. Keep in mind that memento mori, even though it was remembered to die, it was meant to celebrate life. So even in wedding bands, you would see a skull or MM or a skeleton on the inside of the band. You would even see them on the outside on occasion. This pendant up at the top is French, and it was actually given to a bride on her wedding day. And the little skeleton goes in and out, so she could take the skeleton out and look at it, and then she could put it back in, a little pendant. It's so cute, don't you think? The ring next to it is from 1680, and it is English. And the three rings here at the bottom are all German-made from 1750. So this expanded time, but it also was all of Europe. It was not centralized in England. It was a concept that spread across. So where does memento mori flow into Victorian mourning? Well, they are slightly different. They do have an overlap. And the Victorian era, it really does take the transition, and you can see a slight change in the concept. So the idea of memento mori, as I said, was I will remember to die, or remember to die in plain. But it becomes more personal in the Victorian era. So it kind of evolves slightly. And you go from I will remember to die to I will remember to die because I know this person who has passed, or I loved this person who has passed, and therefore I will forever remember them while I'm thinking of my own life. Memento mori jewelry was intended to celebrate life. Victorian mourning jewelry was a visual expression of grief. There is your difference. It goes from general to personal. It was worn to show the world that you were suffering the loss, but you were keeping in mind that everyone experiences loss. The symbols in Victorian mourning traditions, with the grave markers and with the jewelry, the symbolism changes. You go from the skulls and crossbones and hourglasses to lilies and urns and the weeping angel and the folding hands. You get this slight change in imagery with the two periods. That's what makes these two rings very important. They're personalized because they have the hair in them, but they also have the very distinguished memento mori symbols of the skull and the skeleton. So these two rings actually came from that transition period. These are both 1830-ish rings, circa 1830, and they're right at that cusp, at that changeover in the time period. So these are more definitive of the Victorian mourning jewelry that we all consider and we all think of. The visual shift in the jewelry, you can see these are all far more elaborate with the hair. There's some imagery, and you have the high definition, the high image down at the end. So these pieces, they are all hair encompassing. Even this one on the end, which is jet black, there's actually hair on the back side. That's one. But as you can see, they go from very simplistic to extremely elaborate. You go from things like just a lock of hair with an image, all the way over to the extensive braiding. You have the bleeding of the different colors of hair. That one, I would almost say that that's still one person's hair. It's probably just in transition of their age, some gray, some still dark. Because items like this, they're small enough that it really would have only been for one person. These is early in the Victorian period, so this is more of the rings, brooches, smaller items, that people could carry along with them. Now, the one on the end with the images, that is still made of hair. What they would do is they would take the human hair and they would grind it down into a fine powder, and they'd mix it in with various glues, and they would turn it into essentially a paint. And they would paint the images onto either a white stone, milk stone, or some type of glass. So that is still hair, which is, again, fascinating. Just absolutely fascinating. So while brooches, pendants, and rings were the most common, there certainly was other types of jewelry that were being made, but this is the most common. Now, here on the end, I had mentioned that this is jet. Has everybody heard of the coloring jet black? Someone said so, it's jet black. That's actually referring to the gemstone jet, which is, it's mined throughout the world, but the I guess, best quality jet that you can get is actually in England at the Wellesley Mudstone Formation, excuse me. It was introduced at the Great Exhibition in 1851, and it just was mainly used for mourning jewelry because Queen Victoria said so. She essentially fell in love with it. She started having all types of jewelry and items carved from the stone, especially after Prince Albert passed away. It's a slightly duller stone. It doesn't come with a high polish as many other stones do. So it's kind of, look at me, I'm beautiful, but I'm also respectfully mourning, you know? In 1870, a publication called The Queen out of England was quoted in saying, jet jewelry is much in vogue for social wear as well as mourning adornment. And that's when you really start to see this transition of this is mourning jewelry to this is visual mourning social attire. There is a distinct difference. Women were coming out of mourning, but they were still wearing their mourning jewelry. And then they were creating even more above and beyond that mourning jewelry. So rather quickly, you start to see that transition as well. If your Queen Victoria is wearing it for 40 years, by golly, I'm going to wear it for longer than my 4 years of mourning. So quickly, you start to see this social wear mourning attire that was going to be your jewelry and your accessories. It starts to expand to include things beyond rings and pendants and brooches. You start to see necklaces and earrings and bracelets and even watch fobs being created out of hair. While most women were making these items in the home as part of their domesticated duties, there was also an option to purchase hair at department stores or clothing stores. You could also purchase or have donated locks from people. Women would sell their hair a lock at a time, essentially just to earn a little extra money. And then there was also the use of horsehair. If you only had a little bit of someone's hair and you wanted to do a braid of, for a necklace, then you could purchase horsehair that happened to match the hair that you already had, and that would extend your item so you could create what you really wanted to create. These are all items that would have been made. This is all made out of hair. Here's a few more of these various patterns. You could find these pattern books in stores, and you could just pick out what you wanted, whether you wanted the hair to create it, or if you wanted the more defined instructions as to how to do it. They had books that would actually show women braid by braid, fold by fold, how to create the item they wanted to create. And here's some beautiful examples of these pieces. Everything that is not metal is hair. None of it is fabric, none of it is cordage. It's all very detailed, very time-consumingly braided, twisted, and knotted hair to create these absolutely gorgeous pieces. So, of course, with this explosion of the mourning attire, the jewelry just was, too small. People wanted more, of course, more and more and more. So for those that participated with the visual mourning, they would also use mourning decor, and that's when you bring your hair wreaths into play. In the U.S., a lot of women made these elaborate hair wreaths out of wire and hair, not only the deceased's hair, but of course horse hair, and they would usually make them into floral designs. These mourning wreaths were made of multiple deceased people's hair. It wasn't usually just one person. On occasion, you could find some that was one person's hair, but normally it was a whole group, usually all family members. And the wreaths would grow and they would change. So kind of envision this. If you have a wreath and you have a centerpiece, the person whose hair is in the middle is the most recently deceased. And then when someone else passes away, that hair is removed and it's put around the rim, and the newest deceased's hair goes more towards the middle. So these were in constant flux, constant changing. Then you had these other wreaths that were dedicated to the matriarch or the patriarch of the family, where their hair would be in the center, and then the outside would grow based on their children's death, grandchildren's death, things like that. Of course, keep in mind in this period, you had multi-generational deaths happening at the same time. It's not like now where, if grandma dies and grandson dies within the same week. It's very unusual. But then it wasn't that unusual. It could easily happen. So you had the growth of these wreaths. And of course, the larger a wreath became, the more elaborate it became. They no longer could be this just dedicated to the heavens, is what they would call it. Originally, they would be horseshoe shaped, and this top would be thinner than the bottom, and it was supposed to represent facing up to heaven. But as these wreaths got thicker, heavier, and larger, and expanded with the family, they kind of broke away from that, and they went from being more decorative and artistic than bereavement pieces. Eventually, the wreath changed into the remembrance wreath, which most of these are. And they would be for family trees as opposed to death of family members. So you would have hair from deceaseds, but you would also have living relatives' hair that you would incorporate in it. This one is very interesting. I know it's very difficult to read, but it's actually a listing of births and deaths and some family history, and it's everyone whose hair is actually within the wreath or within the image there. It's a beautiful piece, very interesting. Horse hair was still being used. It was quite common because you had to do something to make sure that your image that you wanted to project in your item would come complete the way you wanted it. And let's face it, not everybody's got great, wonderful, thick hair, but horse hair, now that's a different story. It could be heavier, it could be thinner, it could be braided, it could be broken down. It's beautiful. So anyway, you could create the design you wanted with your family's hair. You could buy hair of other people down the street. You could get horse hair, and you could just braid these and twist these and make these very full and elaborate wreaths. So we're almost at the end, I promise. The UWF Historic Trust Holdings has expanded over the years. Of course, as many of you know, we are constantly bringing in items. And we actually have a pretty substantial collection of hairwork pieces. Now, this one over here at the end, this is the one that was at the doorhouse. It is not a bereavement wreath. It is actually a remembrance wreath. The lady who created this, she lived in Pensacola as a child, and then when she married, she moved to Chicago. And she created this wreath as a remembrance of her childhood in Pensacola. In the center, it's kind of hard to see, but in the center, there's actually hair that's been formed into birds, and she said that reminded her of the birds in the area. I don't see it. I mean, I see the birds, but I don't see how they stand out as Pensacola, but to each their own. She started making this in the 1860s, and in 1870 we see where she submitted it for a artisan competition in Chicago and won first prize. Eventually it made its way back down here, and it's been in the doorhouse for quite a few years. We have several items in our collection that are only seen once, maybe twice a year. These are all pieces from our collection. A lot of these are seen during this time of year when we do our death and mourning programs. But they're currently all on exhibit, if anybody gets a chance to go and see it, in our Death and Mourning, the Finery of Loss exhibit that's at the History Museum. It's going to be open for quite a few months. I'll just put that little tag in there so everybody goes and sees it. But these are all pieces from our collection. These as well, these were both at the doorhouse as well. So great and beautiful pieces. And these are some of the last ones. This watch fob here on the end has actually never been shown on display before, from what we can tell. It is now on exhibit at the History Museum in our new exhibit. So this is our collection that we have here. So I'm very proud of the pieces that we have. But anyway, I would like to thank you for your time. It was short and sweet. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you have to do something special to preserve these? These are hundreds of years old.
Well, hair, fortunately, is one of those few things that does not decay. The human body will, of course, decay away, but hair remains. So, there's been Egyptians coming out of tombs that have had their hair is still there. So, there's not a whole lot that we have to do for preservation, other than just making sure we can keep the dust off of them. But other than that, they're pretty self-sustaining. Yes, ma'am.
Can DNA be studied from such hair? And if so, is anybody studying history and genealogy through these hair objects?
To my knowledge, they have not. I do know that DNA has to be taken from the root, and most of this would have been cut locks. So I'm not sure if many of this would have a root that could be studied, but I'm not familiar if anybody has tried or not. Yes, ma'am.
Were these from people from Pensacola, or these have just been donated from different people from different areas?
Quite a few of them are actually from Pensacola families. Now, where they originally got them, where the original family member was when they passed and the item was made itself, I'm not sure of, but most of them are actually from Pensacola-related families.
You have the Runyon hair.
In our collection, we actually have a clipping of the local artist Runyon. Is anybody familiar with Runyon? We have a clipping of his hair, and it came with a lovely note with his death date on it, and that it was a curl taken on the day of his death. So it's not in the exhibit, but it's interesting to know that even when Mr. Runyon passed away, that this was still a tradition that was being kept. Anybody else?
Where's the doorhouse?
I'm sorry?
Where's the doorhouse?
The doorhouse is at the corner of Church Street and Adams, down at the end of Church Street. It's currently off of tour because they were replacing the windows, but it's supposed to be reopened for daily tours pretty soon. In the next couple of months, it's supposed to reopen.